Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. America's going down the drain. Let's get all the details. Stacy Herbert.
Well, Max, that's what you would think if you listened to Moody's. Now, my first headline is actually a tweet from Eric Schatzer from Bloomberg. Ron Paul tells me AAA rating probably not worth saving. Moody's part of political theater.
Yes, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Moody's, they've run out of foreign countries to destroy with their corrupt ratings, and now they're set their targets on the United States. So this is exactly what was predicted by Marx, isn't it? The capitalists would sell themselves the noose to hang themselves.
Well, the oligarchs, I don't think you could call these people capitalists, but I'm also noting the word theater, and you often see that in the terms of war, the war theater. And I think this is part of what Moody's is. The rating agencies are part of the banking occupation globally. They don't recognize any nation.
Well, they are going to downgrade. They've already put them on notice. People are saying, is it part of the theater of the debt ceiling debate that's going on? Regardless of what's going on with the debt ceiling, the American AAA rating for its bonds will be cut. Now, I have suggested that countries like Greece that are being attacked by Moody's should set up their own rating agency and return the favor by downgrading American debt first and thus reap the benefit of this. But for some reason, George Papadreou is financially illiterate and has no idea how to fight a financial war.
Let's move back to the economic war theater. And Ron Paul, speaking of political theater, this is a video, and it's Ron Paul asking Ben Bernanke in Congress, interrogating him.
Very quickly, if you could answer another question, because I'm curious about this. You know, the price of gold today is $1,580. The dollar during these last 3 years was devalued almost 50%. When you wake up in the morning, do you care about the price of gold?
Well, I pay attention to the price of gold, but I think it reflects a lot of things. It reflects global uncertainties. I think the reason people hold gold is as a protection against what we call tail risk, really, really bad outcomes. And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about the potential of a major crisis, then they have gold as a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
Well, this is a fantastic video clip because it shows you, really, now 40 years after the closure of the gold window, it took 40 years for wonks and policymakers and Fed chairmen to completely disassociate money from gold in their minds. And this is the root of the global problem, is that they think that their academic theories can solve problems of the global economy. And we heard this from Christine Lagarde recently. Her response to the European crisis is to simply create more debt. This is a typical response of a Bernanke or an academic who their job is to come up with formulas how to increase the debt load. And they have lost touch with the reality of gold. And what's going to happen is that the market itself will impose the reality by crashing the fiat currencies more than they've already been crashed. This is why we've got our price target of gold now set to $10,000.
Well, the other thing is that there are many reasons why people and investors and nations around the world have been buying gold. And tail risk, as Bernanke dubs it, is one of the many reasons. He is the primary reason I would say people are buying gold. But he's distracting you with this one element of tail risk. And I want to move on to the next to show you the political theater and how it works with the propaganda that we see going on in this financial war. Talks. Inflation change could cut Social Security. You know, Obama and the Republican Party are hashing it out they've been hashing out how to fight this deficit. One of the options includes a new inflation measure for Social Security that could produce savings close to $200 billion through a combination of reduced benefits and higher taxes. The proposal would mean adopting a new inflation measure which would allow policymakers to gradually cut benefits and increase taxes in a way that might not be readily apparent to most Americans. It's called the Chained Consumer Price Index.
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. In other words, when the formula doesn't support their misconception about why the economy is failing, they change the formula instead of simply looking at the evidence, staring them straight in the face. Now, by adjusting the CPI again, and they do this every few years, Bernanke will look at the revised CPI and say, well, there's no inflation. And so he'll keep interest rates near zero, which of course means that speculators can borrow at rates near zero. And the thing that they buy with the money that they're borrowing at near zero, thanks to Bernanke, is food and energy. The people on the street are seeing the food and energy prices skyrocket, and they complain to government that we can't eat anymore. And the government says, well, we don't include food and energy in our analysis of consumer prices. We took that out of the consumer price index. We only look at this new version of the CPI. You must be wrong. The fact that you're starving and can't afford gas is incorrect, because our revised CPI model tells us that interest rates need to be near zero as a favor to the speculators. And it goes on and on and on.
But this goes back to the importance of why gold and silver are skyrocketing. We've had many trolls out there saying that don't buy gold and silver. Those are in a bubble. Those are crazy. When the crazy guy is this guy, Ben Bernanke, and Obama and all of the politicians in America is part of the political theater. They pretend there's a red team and a blue team. They talk about cutting your taxes, while at the same time they're noting here that low and middle income families will be hit the worst. And why they're hitting you is because they said that it will not be readily apparent to most Americans. As long as their guy is cutting taxes, they think they're not being taxed.
Yes, well, they are aware of the fact that they're becoming bankrupt, but they have no voice. They have no vote, because only the plutocracy, $1, one vote, operates in the United States anymore. And the plutocracy, which is tied into the speculative class, they want interest rates to be near zero. And Ben Bernanke is in their pocket. He works for them. He keeps interest rates near zero, saying there's no inflation, even though it's biting him in the face. Obviously, there is inflation, but he is a robot programmed to misinterpret the data.
Well, let's move on here, Max. Shoplifting, is it good for the economy? This fits in with the whole propaganda. This is from CNBC. And they're looking at the latest report from the National Retail Federation that showed that inventory loss due to shoplifting increased by $3.6 billion, nearly 11% last year. CNBC says some economy watchers say that that's actually a good sign for the economy, that there's an increase in shoplifting, because it shows that people are willing to take a risk that they might be locked up.
It shows initiative. No, but also because, again, the majority of the growth comes from the banking sector, and the banking sector is deregulated, and they are engaged in wholesale thieving and larceny. So if somebody goes into a 7-Eleven store and steals, they say that guy could work for J.P. Morgan. That guy could work for Goldman Sachs. He knows how to steal money. He could be useful to us someday.
But this is how they just reclassify and decide that's not what you think it is. Your eyes are lying to you. So Ben Bernanke can say, oh, all those people buying gold, that's just, they're afraid of tail risk.
Well, stealing also puts more people in prison, and there's a huge prison industrial complex and private prison business. So that's good for the economy too.
Yes, and remember, George Bush tried to reclassify as manufacturing all the hamburger flippers in America. So they tried to paint their economy as looking like the biggest economy in the world. And it's becoming more and more obvious that that's a big fraud.
It all comes back to, you could make the comparison to Roman coin clipping, where they clip the coins, which created this massive inflation and the collapse of the Roman Empire. In America, the coin clipping comes in these new ways. They statistically recalculate the statistics to make it look like there's no inflation, or they reclassify hamburger flippers from a service job to a manufacturing job to make it look like there's growth where there's no growth. And just like the Roman Empire that was overexpanded, too many military occupations, they'll collapse for the same reason. This is not new. It happens throughout history.
So let's look at how the top trickles down to the bottom here and how great the economy in America is obviously doing. As copper soars, thieves extract a price. When thieves ransacked 8 air conditioners in an apartment complex in the city of Mobile, Alabama, the culprits made off with $800 worth of scrap metal and left residents with a $38,000 worth of damages. So that's exactly how Ben Bernanke operates.
That's right.
He bails out the bankers for, say, they've stolen $800 billion or $80 trillion, and it costs the economy many times that to replace and repair the damage.
Right, and the way he justifies it is he goes in front of Congress and he sees, I don't see inflation, so I keep interest rates cheap, which makes commodity prices skyrocket. And Congress will say, well, we see skyrocketing commodity prices. We see inflation. But because he uses the revised CPI number, which excludes food and energy, he doesn't see inflation. So therefore, it just perpetuates itself. He is blind. He's inflation blind on purpose because it helps the speculators.
There are new laws being introduced all over America because of the rash of thefts. So, for example, they mentioned South Carolina, which has a new law prohibiting recyclers from paying cash for copper. So the sheriff said there, we wanted to take the incentive to steal out of the equation, which could be a great example for the American population at large, to close the Fed window to enable these banking banksters, these crime lords, from swapping their toxic assets for, treasury paper.
Right, but you see, they point to the hedge fund managers and the money managers and the banksters who have stolen all the money as being their heroes, as being the heroic Superman of the economy based on their super larceny. So there's no cultural shift away from praising the crooks on Wall Street. There's no heroes in American society. They only praise the crook.
And so these crime lords look around them and they see the disaster in front of them, and then they rename everything to make it look good. And this is my final headline here, Max. UK needs rich to get richer, OBR finds. OBR is the Office for Budget Responsibility. And they say that although growing levels of income inequality have been identified by economists as one of the causes of the recent crisis, their analysis shows that government is more dependent than ever for the rich for tax revenues. So therefore, they should encourage the rich to get richer at the expense of the poor and the middle class.
Well, again, statistically, they're using numbers to legitimize an argument that promotes serfdom and neo-feudalism. Obviously, they're going to be paying more in taxes as a percentage as more of the bottom 90% end up in prison. Okay? Clearly, if you have a serf population, then the taxes being paid will be concentrated in those people who are operating the prisons. So had this headline appeared 400 years ago in the feudalism gazette of Europe somewhere, it would make more sense. But to see it here in the year 2011 seems completely out of place.
But it also goes very well with what Bernanke is saying about inflation and that there's no inflation, is in fact, this will result, the rich will get richer, the rich do get richer with inflation because they hold all the assets and they're protected, whereas the poor working for pennies on the dollar, you see across the world, they always end up decimated.
Yeah, well, the joke's on the rich, however, because all of their wealth is tied into paper currencies and the US dollar. Less than 1% of all the invested assets in the world are held in precious metals. And the joke is on them because as precious metals continue to skyrocket, they're the ones wearing the barrels, living in the poorhouses, while we lord over them. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay right there. Don't go away. Much more coming your way.
Supervision, disciplinary punishment, education, work. Could the penitentiary system transform a criminal into a law-abiding citizen? Russian prisons, life behind bars on RT.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to London and speak with Amir Taqi, co-founder of BitcoinConsultancy.com. Amir, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Very good to be on the show, Max. And I must say that your show was one of the first to start reporting on Bitcoin, and you actually gave a very, very informative coverage of it compared to the later sensationalist news afterwards.
Well, that's what we try to do here is to look at this issue because it is a very interesting issue. You're a consultant, a Bitcoin consultant, and as you point out, there's been some quite a spread in how this story is being reported. and it invites quite a passionate response. People either love it or hate it, the idea of Bitcoin. So walk us through it. What is Bitcoin? Why does it ignite such passion?
Bitcoin actually is the first decentralized currency, online that is. And the thing is that because nobody owns the network, there's no concept of control. Nobody can tell people how Bitcoin is used. And so there are people that use Bitcoin for services which aren't quite legal. That seems to generate a passionate response from people who just look at Bitcoin at first glance and automatically assume that because some people are using it for bad things, that therefore the currency is only used totally for bad things.
Let me cut in here for a second, Amir, and give some background, a little bit background. So, in other words, let's start from the beginning. In terms of Bitcoin, it's a digital currency. It's a decentralized currency in that there is no central authority like a central bank. And it's also an encrypted currency, which gives it remarkable benefits, the ones that you'd expect and want from a currency if you're looking to conduct business outside of surveillance of, let's say, corrupt federal employees or governments. But on the same token, obviously, just like cash, it can be used for nefarious ends as well. But let me talk about a word that is used, two words actually. One is called disruptive, and another D word, disintermediation. So in terms of disruptive disintermediation, we've seen P2P software development in such projects like Apache software that now runs the bulk of all the major internet applications. We've seen P2P music file swapping, which has totally transformed the music industry and gave birth to a whole new generation of music and technology. Some argue there's pros and cons there. But this is to apply the P2P idea applied to money, applied to currency. And so this is what's difficult, because we just heard Ben Bernanke being asked by Ron Paul if gold was money. He said no. But he believes in fiat money, which many argue is not money. So where does BitCurrency fall into that spread? Is it more like gold, or is it more like a dollar, a fiat currency?
If you look around you, you see there's a lot of people actually saying a lot of things about what Bitcoin is or Bitcoin isn't. But if we've actually spoken, our group, the Bitcoin consultancy, to various lawyers, and they actually say that they don't know what it's going to be classified as. And that's the intelligent answer to give. It's kind of looking now that it might be classed as a commodity, kind of like what's happening with gold. Gold isn't actually, you have all the gold businesses in the UK, they aren't actually regulated. Now, let me go back to what you were saying before about the peer-to-peer aspect. This is like part of a larger movement that has been going on for many years. If you look at the software industry, they came out with proprietary software, which is treating software as a product. And there's been a movement of people on the internet, shall we say, building their own economy, their own structures and ways of governing. And one of these products was Linux, which as far as I'm concerned is a rock star in the computing world. You can find it on mobile phones, servers, embedded devices, it's everywhere. And ever since then, there's been continually more and more things coming out of this movement. So for instance, WikiLeaks is one thing, and BitTorrent, as you were saying, is another. And basically, these are very subversive technologies, which is taking the power structures and dispersing them among people.
So in other words, you use the word subversive, but in a good way, I would say, in the same way that democracy is subversive in that it distributes power to a maximum number of people in society. And let me ask you this about another social networking, what they call social networking phenomenon. If you look at Facebook, of course, is a place that leverages on this P2P aspect of the world, and yet almost 99.9% of all the profits are going to end up in the pockets of a few bankers and the executives at Facebook. There is no real distribution of that phenomenon of social networking to the people who actually built the value. Whereas Bitcoin, it's the opposite, isn't it? The people who build the value actually get to keep the value. Would you agree with that?
The thing with Facebook is is that it's not really any kind of peering technology. When you go on Facebook, you're trusting Facebook. You put your data into Facebook, which they don't necessarily use, in a totally good fashion. Bitcoin, if you think about it, is actually, you are a willing participant in this network. With the current financial system, if I don't want to use the banks, or I don't want to put my money into fiat money, I have no choice if I want to do business in the daily world. But something like Bitcoin, the whole concept is that now I have my money on my computer and I can choose who I want to trust. That's a really powerful thing. And you mentioned Facebook. Well, Facebook is a private company. Bitcoin is not owned by anybody. The infrastructure is owned by the participants in the entire network.
Right, okay, and the actual workings of Bitcoin, there's, for those who are not familiar, there's two sides to it. There are the people who are purchasing the coins to be used in this economy, and then there are the people who actually create the coins. And the people who purchase the coins, they essentially, it's like any other currency transaction, they put in their currency and they get Bitcoins, which they can then use for transactions. On the creation side of the coin, however, this is something that is beyond the scope of this program to explain. But the point is that many argue that it is purely digital and it could disappear in a heartbeat. And we had a crash recently on one of the exchanges of Bitcoin, had nothing to do with Bitcoin itself, but on one of the recent exchanges. How robust is Bitcoin?
This exchange was one private exchange called Mt. Gox. You have the money, which is Bitcoin, which is separate from the exchanges. So what happened is one exchange was very negligent and they got hacked into, and someone stole a load of Bitcoins and suddenly flooded the market with them, driving the price on that exchange down to zero. Now, our group runs the UK exchange, which is Bitcoin, and during that crash, we saw relatively very little change in the price of Bitcoin to GBP. The thing about the exchanges is that anybody can set up an exchange. All you need to open an exchange is a bank account. That's one of the really cool advantages of Bitcoin, is it's truly international. There is no concept of borders in this currency. Due to the nature of it being completely decentralized, there's a lot of competition in this network. And this competition actually drives the overhead of the currency right down to what it is. As the hashing power of the network rises, the overhead drops due to the competition from the people. So one of the things that we've seen is that this power of the network has been exponentially rising. It's more powerful than any supercomputer in the world right now.
So finally, we've got about a minute left. I just want to return to something you said earlier, which I think is very important. When I asked you to compare it, is it closer to a fiat dollar or a gold? And you were saying that, well, we're swinging toward this idea that it's more like gold. And this, I think, is conceptually very difficult for people to wrap their minds around, because it sounds like the antithesis of gold. However, it is like gold in that it's anonymous, it's a limited supply, it's highly valued, and it's decentralized, and it has really gold-like properties. Can you expand on that just a little bit more before we have to go?
Bitcoins is basically, the analogy is like digital cash. Once you spend them, the transaction is irreversible. So yeah, another argument for why not to use PayPal is that there's a classic scam where you send PayPal dollars and then you refute the payment after you sent it. And that's called a chargeback. And that makes it very expensive for vendors on the internet to use PayPal. With Bitcoins, there is no concept of chargebacks. And that's another reason why you don't have to put your prices higher to cover this fee. So like one of the things is using Bitcoins on the internet as a microtransaction system. And it's not practical to use PayPal if you have to charge slightly higher on your goods to cover this payment, especially if you're selling goods that are worth very little, especially like online content, which today everybody can make and the actual price of it is very low.
Right, and this is why digital content producers on the web, obviously, as we go toward micropayments, are looking at Bitcoin, and this is further disintermediation away from the entrenched content providers who are also wed to the outdated copyright model. So this is really a two-fisted punch in the face to the entrenched oligopoly in the finance and content creation industry. I take it then also, if you compare it to Zynga, or Facebook credits, the comparison would be that on Facebook, the number of credits or Zynga dollars that can be created is infinite, whereas on a Bitcoin, it's finite.
BitTorrent totally destroyed copyright. You now see people on the internet sharing creative works, remixing those works and creating new stuff. It's a generator of culture. And in that same way, Bitcoin could be thought of as a way that it could be used as a baton against legal tender.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. We're going to check back with you, if that's okay, in a few months' time to see how this market is expanding. It's probably the most explosive, fast-growing currency market in the world. It's a kissing cousin to gold, and it's going to dominate this decade in terms of news stories about currencies, in my opinion. Amir Tawki, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Amir Tawki. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.